Jim Lardner, and this is Feet to the Fire. Our show is a shout-out to the Democratic Party and the women and men soon to be running the executive branch of our national government. I'll be talking to all sorts of thoughtful and caring citizens, insiders, outsiders, academics, organizers, warriors for racial and economic and environmental justice about the hardest questions facing our newly elected leaders and what the rest of us can do to inspire them to rise to the biggest occasion of their lives and ours.
This land was made for you and me.
It's a beautiful day in my neighborhood. The leaves are turning, the horns are honking at the news that Americans have decided to terminate their contract with Donald J. Trump. Joining me to talk about where that leaves us is Donald Cohen. He's the executive director of In the Public Interest, a research and policy organization that monitors the state of public goods and services. Donald, welcome. First of all, congratulations to us both and the 300 plus million of our fellow citizens who will very soon no longer have that odious figure as our president and would-be dictator, to say nothing of the large space he has carved out in the national psyche.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited about that.
And how did you spend the last week before the election?
Well, I live in Los Angeles, and my wife and I drove to Phoenix, Arizona, and spent four and a half days on a door knocking program organized by the Unite Here, the hotel workers, hospitality workers union. We knocked on, hundreds of doors, talked to many people. We were mostly in working class areas of Phoenix, in Latino areas of Phoenix, and people were very, really wanted to vote, and they really wanted to get rid of Trump. The folks whose program we went to, this is mostly the Hotel Workers Union, but there were other organizations as well that are part of their coalition, have been building in Arizona, primarily Phoenix and Maricopa County, for 10, 15 years. So it wasn't just a sweep-in operation. They took 2 rounds and beat Joe Arpaio. They took over the city council. Former hotel housekeeper is the vice mayor now at Phoenix. This program was, the last weekend, say, of like a 3 or 4 month program where 300 or 400 people were walking every day with very rigorous, health protocols. Not one person got sick, and they knocked on doors over and over and over again and talked to voters and got them registered to vote and, got people to submit early ballots.
And flipped Arizona. Well, you and I and a great many Americans in Arizona and elsewhere have been looking forward to this day, and a little hooting and hollering certainly seems in order. But I gotta say, the relief I'm feeling is not quite the relief I had hoped for. The presidential verdict aside, there's a lot to worry about in these election results. Just for instance, 70 million Americans voted for Trump after 4 years' experience with his hate-mongering and lying and heartlessness, and in the middle of a public health and economic disaster made much worse by his indifference and incompetence. Among those 70 million were at least 7 million new Trump backers, people who were won over, you might say, by his performance in office. How in the hell do you explain that? How in the hell was this not a landslide? And while we're mucking around in the land of how in the hell did so many House and Senate Republicans get a pass, not only for being Trump's lackeys, but for blocking a desperately needed pandemic relief bill? As my first post-election guest, you get first crack at these questions.
Well, you saved the easy ones, put the easy ones at the beginning. So it's way too early to speculate, but that won't stop me. So a question of factors that might have played a role. One is that the power of Fox News and talk radio in rural communities can't be understated. That, I think there's no question, created a solid block of anti-truth, Trump cultists. Second, the religious communities, but evangelical communities, the issue of abortion. In the exit polls that I was looking at this morning, 42% still believe that abortion should be illegal. I knocked on doors where that was the deciding vote for people. That's a block. That's people who are in that block. They don't stray. And then my final speculation is, while it's a public health crisis, but most people who had it got better. Most people don't know someone who passed away, but everybody was suffering from the economy, from the economic disaster. And that was Trump's message over and over again: open up. So that could have played a role as well. And you can never underestimate, the racial undertones of the Trump electorate as well.
You have made something of a study of modern government bashing and government bashers. That story also looms large here, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. No question. I mean, I think what we've seen over the past, number of decades is this sort of unrelenting attack on the idea of government and the institution of government. And so what we see now is, really an amazingly divided nation that is in part a product of that. Because if people don't trust one another, and if people don't trust the public institutions that represent us, then we don't have a commitment to the same purpose and the same common project. And the only way we do that common project is through the institutions of government. So to be a little simpler, the attack on government has helped divide us and make us distrust one another and the institutions that represent us.
Can you give us a quick tour of that 4-decade campaign?
Sure. I think, for many, it starts in the early 70s. I mean, there's a prehistory that we won't go into, folks, economists and others. But in 1971, Lewis Powell was commissioned by the Chamber of Commerce to write a memo that many people often referred to as the Powell memo. And it wasn't the only thing happening in that period, but in the beginning of the 1970s, Rick Nixon was president, but also there was a whole raft of, in the previous 10 years into the Nixon administration, of pro-public policies that, Medicare, Medicaid. Then there was a whole set of regulatory agencies created, the EPA, OSHA, sort of a whole set of things that put the health of America center stage. And what was decided, what the strategizing that happened among basically the corporate elite was essentially saying, we need to get organized, because they actually believed capitalism was on the ropes because of people like Ralph Nader passing, highway safety law, and Rachel Carson ultimately passing environmental laws. They thought that increase in government regulations was sort of the end of capitalism. That's how they talked. They had to organize themselves. Number two is they had to get much more involved in politics. Before that, they weren't as many. They weren't PACs or super PACs. They spent less time lobbying. They needed to do that in a much more coordinated fashion. This wasn't all necessarily command and control. There was a set of things moving forward. But as money started to flow, they also realized the power and the need to engage in the academy, in universities, and kind of train a new generation of conservative economists and academics. They needed to capture the airwaves. From that, you get Fox News, you get talk radio. Then Reagan was elected, and his, core message was, an attack on government. That's the 10 scariest words in the U.S. language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And so there was sort of a thematic attack on government during the Reagan period, overlaid with, racial dog whistles or bullhorns, talking about welfare queens, saying that government serves them, the undeserving poor or Black poor, and not serve you. So there was a drumbeat by religious conservatives that wanted school vouchers, by corporations that wanted reduced regulations, and by political, ideological conservatives that, believe that in a different society.
The Democratic Party has been badly wounded by this crusade because it's the party that believes in the social utility of government. But how well have Democrats upheld their end of the argument?
I don't believe very well. I mean, it's not easy. Public sentiment is real and distrust of government is real. And so they need to have a conscious strategy to move and develop that trust. And one of the ways to do that is to articulate public values and to articulate the things that we have to do together. They also have to create public institutions that deliver for people, that actually deliver the good, public goods. So I think they failed on that. And then there was the flirtation and with market ideologies to, deliver public goods. Most pronounced during the Clinton years, but still lives with us, that the market can take care of lots of these things. And that lack of ideological progress and an articulation of an ideological frame and a different governing philosophy around public goods, has been pretty weak.
Reagan was supposedly the great communicator, but Bill Clinton was a pretty good communicator. What did he have to say on the subject of government and its proper role in society?
Well, I think he's a complicated person. I mean, I think he probably believed in it, but he was the ultimate triangulator. So, his famous quote, what I think is the bookend of the Reagan quote, is, the era of big government is over. He delivered for the conservatives far more than Reagan did on privatizing federal government.
What kinds of privatization took off during the Clinton years?
Well, the big one was welfare. In the 1996 Welfare Reform Bill that created TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, baked in the possibility of states privatizing their welfare systems. Then which companies got in on that? Lockheed, I think Ross Perot's company got in on that. A few of the actually big military contractors shifted part of their operation to social services. What's interesting to me is, they must have been looking since after the end of the Cold War for other things to do, and saw a huge pot of money in federal spending.
And private prisons, was there some action on that front?
That's right. The strong on crime, sentiment and politics of that period, which Clinton, embraced, put lots of heads in beds, and the private, companies that wanted to benefit from that were both helping to catapult that by their lobbying and their advocacy for strong on crime and victims' rights movements and all of that, and benefiting from it at the same time.
And how about the Obama administration? Barack Obama came into office in the thick of the financial crisis, and his policies included what most Americans perceived as a big bank bailout without any big bank accountability.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, I don't know what it would have been like to be the president when the economy is falling apart, but to hand away that kind of money without strings, and to fail to hold responsible and accountable those who just through pure greed helped to crash the economy, is really a failure of the presidency and of the public. We got to have rules, and we got to have cops on the beat, and we got to make sure we enforce those rules. And the consequences in that, in the financial system were pretty grave.
I'm talking to Donald Cohen about the long and woefully effective assault on the idea of government as an instrument of the common good. You've described it as a drumbeat. So how has all that beating of the drum affected our powers of hearing and thinking?
So right now, the conventional wisdom in America is the market's good, government's bad. I'm being a little simplistic now. Government's inefficient, wasteful, et cetera, et cetera. The market will take care of things. There's sort of conventional wisdom, not necessarily universally adopted, but sort of in the ether.
Does that attitude help explain why the Affordable Care Act stirred such intense hostility and gave the Republicans and the Tea Party an opening to score big gains in 2010?
Well, it wasn't facts. There were no death panels. It was a massive amount of money an organization sitting on a decades-long history of opposition to universal health care that ginned itself up, calling it socialized health care still has impact, calling it government health care still has impact, saying you're going to lose your doctor, you're going to pay higher taxes, all those things that a massive amount of money went into promoting. And the Tea Party, again, funded by the Koch brothers to a great extent, organized into that environment. It was a conservative program. It wasn't universal. It wasn't government, healthcare. The truth didn't matter.
Joe Biden and company would appear to have their work cut out for them. A pandemic, a tidal wave of economic distress, a criminal justice system revealed again and again as a tool of race-based oppression and terror, Gilded Age inequality, the man-made ruin of the planet. With all these obvious and inescapable problems looming in front of them, are you suggesting that the Democrats need to devote some high-priority attention to the abstract task of building trust in government?
Absolutely. It's a hard thing to do, but it is essential. The bottom line, factually, is that for all of those issues that you raised, you have to have government involvement to solve them. You can't save the planet and deal with climate change without government involvement, whether it's regulation or spending or what have you. You can't get everybody healthcare without that. You can't solve inequality without rules for the labor market and economic rules. It simply can't be done.
And could it be useful for a president or others who command public attention to say something like that in so many words?
I believe so. I absolutely believe so. They have to say it, and they have to say it over, and they have to say it over, and they have to be honest about the failures and the things they're trying to get done. I think you have to marry that with honesty. It's not just happy talk, but you have to say, we need a government that works. Actually, here's how I would say it. These are the things that we have to do together. There's no other way to accomplish it. That's number one. And then our task is to try together through our institutions of government, our democratic institutions, make them as good as they can be, constantly reform them to be able to deliver on those public ideals and goals. You've got to articulate what it means to be a country and a society that depends on one another. That's not inconsequential. The second thing is we have to remember this is after 4 years of Trump, who lied every day of his administration, who denigrated science and ignored, not just ignored science, but denigrated science and facts. So I think it's super important to tell the truth and in a very proactive and honest way. You've got to reach lots and lots of people. And you've got to figure out how also to somehow chip away at the divide. There will be 30 or 40%. Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and Trump, even after he's out of office, will continue to stir up, hatred and conspiracy and all that. There's nothing we can do about that. We got to find, is there a majority for truth and for trying to figure things out together? The other point I want to make, and it's not just about what the president does. There's 20 million people work for government in America, including teachers and school board members and, and school districts and cities and states and the federal government, and they're all public servants. And they as well need to play a role of articulating, public values and what public service means. And there are many, many more of us that depend on it. We have kids in schools. So I think this has to be kind of an all-in responsibility to rebuild, again, first, sort of trust in each other. And number one, number two, kind of a new discussion about the things that we have to do together if we're going to do them at all. What I call pro-public ideals. It's not just about the president. It's sort of a little bit about all of us.
Many people, including Joe Biden, have compared 2020 to 1932. Franklin Roosevelt's election also came at a time of widespread and well-founded distrust of government. I've been dipping back into the early history of the New Deal, and Roosevelt and his people seem to have been thinking about this problem. Just a few weeks after his inauguration, Congress approved the creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, which would eventually employ some 7 million Americans and go down as the most popular of all Roosevelt's programs. The first CCC camps were up and running incredibly by the end of April 1933. Should the Biden team be looking for early initiatives that would have that kind of visibility?
I mean, visibility and impact. It's not all PR, right? The Senate may or may not be in Democratic control. It certainly won't have a filibuster-proof majority. There'll be limits on what the president can do, but the president, the executive branch, and whatever can be done in the legislative branch should do whatever it can as quickly as it can. And not just for show, because we are absolutely in a crisis. We are in a health crisis because of COVID. We are in an economic crisis also because of COVID, but its own distinct features. They've got to move absolutely as quickly as they can using whatever tools they have. And they should not make the same mistake, I don't think they will, that Obama did early on, thinking that there was a bipartisan path.
Another thing Roosevelt did right away was to go on national radio, a novelty in its own right, and explain in very simple, low-keyed language why his administration had to shut down the nation's banks for a few days, and why Americans should have faith in those banks when they reopened. Does our combined health and economic crisis give Joe Biden a chance to do something like that? And could he have the makings of an effective fireside chatter?
I think so. I mean, Obama was, an inspiring orator in some ways, and then also just a straight talker that, I like listening to. I think, I don't think Biden's an inspiring orator, but I think he's a straight talker and an empathetic communicator and listener. I think that's genuine, I think, and real and sort of baked deep into his personality. So I have high hopes on that regard. I also, given that we've got real things to do, I hope he's got a little bit of Lyndon Johnson in him too, to fight hard to make things happen and use the power he has to try to get things done.
Biden has laid out an ambitious agenda. Universal preschool, tuition-free public college for every low-income kid, $1.7 trillion invested in clean energy, millions of new jobs here, there, everywhere, and of course, a way out of the COVID crisis. All of it without raising taxes on anyone who earns less than $400,000 a year. Does he run the risk of getting a little overextended in the promises department? And does that matter? Would he do well to take it down a notch, not substantively, but rhetorically?
I do think overpromising is a problem. Even if we had a functioning democracy, I don't think our democracy is functioning so well right now because of all of the lies and the conspiracy theories. But even when you have a functioning democracy, things are hard to accomplish. I mean, I think I'm going to roll back just a little bit to what we were talking about earlier about the history. They needed to change how we thought about the filters by which we put our policy discussions. Because previously it was about health, the environment, safety. That was, Nader and Rachel Carson. That was the filter through which we looked at policy, and they realized they needed to change it to cost. Everything's about how much it costs, and from that we get cost benefit analysis and job killers and a whole set of things. And we need to, and they wrote the rules. There's a regulatory process. There's a federal agent. There's a federal office within OMB whose job it is to do that. We've got to institutionalize a much more progressive-minded set of governing values as well, in the opposite direction. That puts the health of us as a society, puts democracy at the center of it, a healthy democracy, and puts the saving the climate at the center of it. We need to figure out how to do that.
And how to win 2 Senate races in Georgia in 8 weeks. and how not to lose seats in Congress in 2022.
Exactly. Well, and we had some losses this time, so it's, I think we're uncharted territory. And Trump's not going away. So he will have a mouthpiece. He will use it. He will endorse candidates. He will go back on the stump. He's a narcissist. So the only thing he can do is try to, continue to try to be at the center of something.
Or just maybe he'll be too busy scrambling to pay his humongous debts and fend off charges brought by state and local prosecutors in New York and elsewhere.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that for sure. There's been no more corrupt, grifter presidency, certainly in our lifetimes. Probably not in the history of the country.
Donald Cohen, thank you for being the inaugural guest on Feet to the Fire, and thank you and the whole Unite Here team for liberating Arizona.
Well, thanks for having me.
That's our show. If you like what you've heard and identify with our mission, please spread the word through the communications channels of your choice. And please subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice or online at feet2fire.net. That's feet numeral 2fire.net. We'll be back next week with more unsolicited advice and encouragement for America's incoming leaders of government and those working in one good way or another to get the best out of them.
The sun came shining and I was strolling, and the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds rolling. As the fog was lifting, a voice was chanting, this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me.